Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, family, because the EPH is almost a family. My name is Josep Figueras, Director of European Observatory, and I'm very keen to start quickly because we have the great reception tonight and we don't want to miss that one. Well, there cannot be a reception without us. So welcome to this session on behalf of EUPHA and its president, Iveta, Nagyova, and myself. We had the privilege really to put this plenary together. What is the session about? The title is Commercial Determinants of Non-Communicable Diseases, the imperative for a systems approach. What do we mean by that? There are three premises on that. Three premises that perhaps we should not remind ourselves because we all know about them, but let me do it anyway. The idea is to move from a reductionist sort of biomedical model to deal with NCDs to a more systems approach, to looking at the broad cultural, economic, behavioral, and commercial determinants of health. So this session is all about how do we act on these commercial determinants of health. The Lancet series talks about the systems, practices, and pathways in which corporate and commercial actors drive and have impact on health and equity, not always negatively. We're going to talk, I suppose, I hope, about some good practices as well. A couple of statistics also coming from this very good Lancet series this year that I think focus our mind. The products of four industries, tobacco, alcohol, ultra-processed foods, and fossil fuels account for 1/3 of total deaths, which is preventable by dealing with these products. These determinants, I've been arguing for a while, are as bad as the virus. They cross borders as well and create a much larger mortality and morbidity than the virus, than the COVID. Shouldn't they be public goods? Shouldn't be there public goods that we work together to address? Some of these companies, some of these big corporate conglomerates of food, we're going to focus on food today, are larger, have larger finances than many small and middle countries' GDP in Europe. So the task is really important, it's really heavy, it's really difficult. So the third point, therefore, in these premises is what we can do about that without moaning, without being positive about what can we do from public health, what can we do with our policymakers. And the structure is going to be as follows. First, we're going to have a keynote speech framing all these issues. Then we're going to have a poll. In a minute, Nicole, my co-moderator today, will be introducing the Slido. And then we'll hear from really privileged experts in various of these strategies and mechanisms to really see what we can do. And we want to be very constructive. We don't want to moan. I repeat that. We don't want to complain, because it's very much something we do a lot in public health, always complain. So we want to hear from them, what can we do about it? Nicole, can you introduce a bit the logistics and the Slido, please?
Josep. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome also from my side. I'm happy to see so many faces, even if a bit blurred, the ones at the back. But very great to have you here, even though it's the last session of a very long day. As Josep said, we have an excellent panel of speakers with us today, and we really hope you enjoy the session. But we also hope that you'll engage actively in the session, and that's why we've prepared a Slido. The Slido for this event we'll shortly be showing, here we go, the QR code. You can scan this with your phones, and then you can join the discussion by voting in our poll, which will be launched right after the keynote presentation, as well as post any questions or inputs that you might have throughout the panel discussion. And we'll make sure to pick those up as we go through the session. I was told that the Wi-Fi is not very good here. I don't know, many of you might have noticed. So if you can, please use your mobile data, your 4G, your 5G, and vote that way so we can get all of your votes in and contribute to the discussion. And yeah, without further ado, back to you, Josep.
And then you pass the bill to Iveta and to EUPHA for using your 4G data, okay? Iveta Nagyova doesn't need introduction, the president of EUPHA. Perfect person to give us the keynote today, Iveta, because you, as head of the Department of Social and Behavioral Medicine, all the research you've been doing in this field, all the publications, and the idea, Iveta, today is to introduce, frame the issue, and take us immediately to the kinds of strategies we can put together. Please.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It's always a great pleasure to collaborate with you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really nice to be here this evening with you. Thank you very much, Joseph, for a nice introduction. So let me start with the event that happened more than 500 years ago. In 1492, Christopher Columbus changed the world when he tried to reach India, and by accident, he discovered America. But what happened? Why he decided to go west? Europe traded with India and with China already for centuries, so why go west and risk your lives? This decision was not made by choice. Europe was desperate because only a couple of decades ago, precisely in 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople, and they cut Europe off the Silk Road. So the West was facing a huge challenge, similar to like we are facing today, and they needed a new way, and another way, a new non-conventional approach. And since then, the world has changed. And with regard to health, for example, we see a steady and increase in life expectancy. Nevertheless, these extended life years are not necessarily lived in a good health. So at the age of 65, already 80% of the population is suffering at least from one chronic condition. And we know, of course, that aging populations is not only cause of increasing burden of NCDs. There are many more causes, but aging population is one of them. And the scale of the problem is immense. In the European region, 90% of deaths are due to non-communicable diseases, and also 85% of disability-adjusted life years can be accounted to non-communicable diseases. So, therefore, one of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 3.4, is to reduce the premature mortality from NCDs by 1/3 by 2030. Pre-pandemic, only 41% of countries were expected to reach this aim. Now, currently, most of the countries are off track. So we go back to America a little bit. I'm going back to my slide. And in 2025, governments will convene to discuss at the 4th UN high-level meeting on NCDs what progress has been made and what should be the next steps. And what is typical here that we need to move away, as Joseph already mentioned, from the conventional approaches. And what I mean by conventional approaches, the commonly or typically reported 4 risk factors, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol consumption, account for 80% of all NCDs. And this holds true not only for us, but also for other pets. Interestingly, a recent Swedish study showed that 50 to 70% of dogs are obese or overweight. I hope this is not the only thing which you will remember from this presentation, but it's a nice parallel. And these individual level factors kind of like misled the public health community to introduce individual level interventions. But when we look at, for example, just the causes of obesity, it is clear that factors related to obesity are rooted in various domains. It is a complex web of factors at play, many arising in other sectors, such as, for example, transport, agriculture, and food. So in public health, we must stop play the blame game. Who has done it? Is it the individual? Who is responsible? The environment? Who is responsible? The corporate actors? Yes, definitely yes. Big Soda, guilty. Big food, guilty. Big tech, complicit, without a doubt. And when governments are trying to do some regulations, there is this reoccurring mantra, the irresistible urge to believe in free will. So in public health, we definitely have to move beyond the dominance of reductionist biomedical models, focusing on individual level approaches, and embrace a system approach. So understanding a causative links demands a paradigm shift. We have to encompass environmental, political, social, behavioral, economic, cultural, and commercial determinants of health. Commercial determinants of health arise in the context of the provision of goods and services for payment and include commercial activities and the environment in which commerce takes place. Traditionally, public health experts focused on unhealthy products such as alcohol, tobacco, and ultra-processed food. But more recently, as the research emerges and evolves, we are looking at commercial determinants in wider perspective, and we are also including actors, corporate actors that create air pollution and other toxic exposures, social stressors, unsafe working conditions, for example, actions that limit access to life-saving health care. So corporate actors have a major but often invisible impact on NCDs, and they are creating the so-called NCD-genic environment. The impact of the commercial and scale and impact of the corporate actors is really huge. And therefore, sometimes it is very difficult, or very often it's very difficult to fight them. And sometimes it can be even dangerous. So with the scale and accelerating momentum of economic globalization, commercial determinants of health are becoming an increasingly dominant force shaping public and planetary health. And as I said, sometimes it's very difficult to fight them, and transnational corporations ruling the world like new feudal overlords. Obsession with economic growth fuels unhealthy consumption, and corporations are actually required to maximize their profit regardless of their effects on health, disease, injury, disability, and death. Commercial sector uses several practices to maximize their profits. And in 2023, the Lancet Commission identified 7 key practices which are influencing health. And these vary from legal and ethical to illegal and unethical, and everything in the gray zone in between. So what are the 7 key practices? Political practices may range from lobbying to bribery. Scientific practices typically include purposeful spread of misinformation, disinformation, also commodifying knowledge and undermining legitimate science. Marketing practices work with reshaping cultural norms and framing dominant narratives, for example, through advertising unhealthy products through media. And with regard to health risk behavior, this is normalized through this marketing practicing. Supply chain and waste practices can result in groundwater contamination and toxic waste release. And labor and employment practices include modern slavery, especially in low and middle income countries, while financial practices means avoid taxation and also smuggling, for example. With regard to reputational practices, the aim of these practices is to enhance corporate brand image through seemingly pro-social activities or strategic litigations. And here are a couple of examples. What are the key practices of corporate actors? For example, in Slovakia, where I come from, vitamins for children are sold together in one package with Nutella. Another example is the misusing of the charity, like exploiting philanthropy and targeting children. So when we put commercial actors and commercial determinants of health in a wider context, we can see it becomes very, very clear that they influence the determinants of NCDs at various levels. Structural, globalization, urbanization, environmental context, intermediate, social class, health service availability, proximal level, behavioral, and biological factors. So what can be done? How we can fight the negative impact of corporate actors? Echoing Martin McKee and David Stuckler's view since from 2018, we as public health professionals are realistic enough to understand that we cannot mitigate all the harms caused by corporate actors, but neither should we believe that we are as impotent as we often appear. So my colleagues will speak about more possibilities how to tackle this problem, but I would like to say only about one. First of all, changing prevailing narratives. It is very important to understand how people are making choices and how they are manipulated by corporate actors. Shaping health policy norms by implementing checks on corporate power. For example, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, Article 5.3, is a very good example which excludes industry from policy making. Thirdly, supporting communities that resist corporate influences, for example, tax taxation is a very good example, and it should be promoted through social media. And finally, aligning with social movements fighting corporate powers. It's very important to work with civil society and the public. So, if you are interested more in these topics, you can also read the recently published publication in EuroHealth, which is co-authored by Martin McKee. And I'm very happy that it's a present collaboration with the Observatory, and you will hear more about the possibilities also from my colleagues. Thanks a lot, Josep.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to market it to all of you. Thank you, Iveta. That was beautiful. I think you managed very well to put the magnitude of the problem there, the blame game issue and the individual versus the corporate, the scale of the impact of these commercial determinants, and very much their key practices. And now the rest of the session is how do we deal from the regulatory, from the public sector, from the professional sector to deal with these key practices from the corporate world. And you've already been thinking about that. So we have you have in the poll a number of responses. It's not meant to be the list of what to do. It's rather messy, provocative, not much rigor. And the idea is just to trigger your thinking. It's just to trigger your thinking using some of the terminology that your clients, the policymakers, are using at the moment. So we need to be realistic. That's not a beautiful... We debated with our panelists how we could present this poll, and we decided to go with this mix that you saw in there. So is it about evidence? Do we need more evidence? We love to produce evidence in this room. More papers and more evidence, maybe. Benchmarking, naming and shaming. Yes, you have to choose three only, yeah? Radically stepping up national regulations. Some of us would say, I'm trying to influence you here, although some of you have, 200 have voted already. Regulation is ineffective at national level, unless it's done across nations, WHO, the European Union, and so on. Fifth, just to provoke you, many would think, Iveta, that self-regulation by the industry is the way to go. So carrots rather than sticks. So let's see how many believe in carrots and sticks in this room. Nudging, Simon? People of nudging, you know, there was a time that all governments had, many conservative governments had nudging units, because that's the way to do it. You keep choice, individual choice is important. We don't want to manipulate individual choice. Well, we want to manipulate it, but not regulate it or taxation. We want to nudge it. 7, the only way to go about, colleagues, and sometimes I believe in that, is grassroots and civil society. So Caroline, that's yours. Finally, as those of nudging, those on choices say, well, health literacy is the way to go. So, and the results are, and please, panelists, pay attention because I'll expect you, no, you look at it, yeah. Okay.
We get the results?
So the results are, Nicole, help me, stepping up national regulation. So I couldn't quite sell the idea of having it at national, international. Yeah, 40%, 60%, whatever that means. Health literacy for healthy choices. So, Mark, they believe very much on, training the individual and health literacy, so they'll make the choices. Nudging, It's going down, interestingly. Perhaps I influenced the idea. Could you further down this, please? More evidence is needed. You're not supporting your own business, colleagues, because you are all researchers here. Could you move a bit the slide?
Scroll down, please.
Can you? Okay, they cannot move the slide. Why don't you give me the results? How many are voting for more evidence? Anyway, the important thing is that at the top we have, colleagues, national regulations, health literacy, international regulations. So a lot, Amandine, for you here. A lot of regulation. And then it's nudging, okay?
Evidence, 32%.
32% evidence, interesting. Okay, Nicole, shall we start?
Yeah, so let's get started with our panelists and hear about these options. Mark, you're the first one. You can stay seated if you'd like. I can get you...
Or you can stand up. Freedom.
If you want to stand up, stand.
Thank you.
We can nudge you. She's trying to nudge you, but you know.
I'm very resistant to nudges.
Good.
Perfect. Mark Petticrew is a professor of public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and he's also director of the Public Health Policy Research Unit at the National Institute for Health and Care Research in the UK. So Mark, you have a lot of experience researching in this area, and you've recently also been involved in the Lancet series on commercial determinants of health. What can you tell us about the evidence-based interventions that work or potentially work, and how can we make them work in different contexts?
Thanks very much. So I thought that was, I'll just start my clock so that I don't speak too long. Yes, so I thought that was a very interesting list, and it was nice to be prompted and provoked by Josep to answer some of the questions. What I wanted to do when I looked at the list first is to pick off a couple of things off the list. It's a long list, and just make a few comments about them. And Josep mentioned framings at the start of the session. And I just wanted to propose a couple of alternate framings. And I was interested to see that asking for more evidence on effective policies made it onto the top 5. So I thought this is quite an interesting argument, or it's quite an interesting thing to vote for. It seems quite plausible, particularly to academics in the audience, that we would ask for more evidence on effective policies. And I mean, no academic was ever sacked for asking for more evidence. But I think this is a really problematic position to take as public health people, because this is an argument, as many of you will know, that's used by the harmful industries, which Iveta talked about, to prevent effective policies being put in place. So when you vote on the list for effective national policies, and then you say more evidence is needed in effective policies, you're in effect giving with one hand and taking away with the other. And the problem, of course, is that making arguments about the need for more evidence all the time is exactly what these industries love to hear. And the tobacco industry developed this argument about the need for perfect evidence before you can do anything. And of course, there's no perfect evidence. There's no perfect evidence that smoking causes lung cancer because we don't know about all the mechanisms. The alcohol industry makes exactly the same arguments. So when I saw that particular framing, I thought, this is very much a double-edged sword, and I think we need to be very careful about that argument. For one reason, it's used, as I say, it's used against us. The other reason is that within public health, what we don't acknowledge often enough is that it's possible to make perfectly good decisions based on limited evidence. You know, not all good decisions need perfect evidence. There is such a thing as good enough evidence. So Josep asked about the sorts of things that we can do. One thing we can do is stop wringing our hands about public health evidence and start thinking about what sort of evidence is needed to inform better decision making. So we need to be more helpful. I speak as an academic talking to myself here. We need to be more helpful to users of evidence to make better decisions, get less hung up on the evidence and more hung up on the decisions. So that's one thing. Health literacy. So if you voted for health literacy, these industries are going to love that, because that individualistic approach very much depends on putting the responsibility back onto the public and saying, oh, all those people who are clearly overweight or are harmed by alcohol or have cancer-related alcohol-related cancers and so on, that's because they were insufficiently literate about their own health. So health literacy, I think, is also quite problematic. I mean, no one would want people not to be health literate, but it actually is competing. It's an argument which the industry uses to compete against or to push back on the need against effective policies. So that's my first rapid response. Cracking on. The thing that I think was mentioned in both talks about the role of business, and quite often we hear about the need for business to be part of the solution. Partnerships and so on didn't make it onto the list. And I think that's quite interesting because I've often come across the situation in which it's argued, and often by quite senior public health people, that only business has the marketing skills and the reach to help us public health people improve health, and business needs to be part of the solution. So one of the things I think we can do in terms of addressing the commercial determinants is actually bring a bit more critical thinking and a bit more pushback to this. And remember that these sorts of skills are generally used to build and defend markets. There's little or no evidence that any of these skills are used to support public health. And also we can be a bit more confident that as public health practitioners and public health experts, public health also has these skills. They're not unique to industry. Public health has the skills without the conflicts of interest. So my sort of very final, rapid thought I wanted to leave you with is that when we think about the sorts of partnerships with business and partnerships with these harmful industries that are quite common in some countries, including in the UK, which is partnerships with the alcohol industry and the gambling industry, what I think we ought to remember, or what we ought to do, is put our sort of public health hat back on and remember that when these partnerships are promoted, we should see them, it's useful to see them as public health interventions. And for any intervention, if we're presented with an intervention and told that we should endorse this, we always ask, is it effective? What are the benefits? What are the harms? What's the evidence base that this would actually work? But I think quite often when we're presented with these sorts of partnerships, we're sort of told that the reason for engaging with them is that partnership is a good thing and industry reach is a good thing and so on. These are not public health outcomes. So I suppose my main sort of takeaway from that in terms of what to do is that I think what we sometimes do in public health when we think about the commercial determinants and so on, we start to lose some of our critical thinking skills. And I think something that we can quite usefully do is to remember the basic principles of critical thinking and of evidence-based thinking, which we can apply to the commercial determinants of health, that we would apply in any other area. I think sometimes when we get into the commercial determinants of health, we start to feel a bit worried and, well, it's a bit political and it's slightly more problematic because, tobacco's differently. I think we just need to rehearse and apply the sort of same critical thinking and evidence-based skills that we apply in other areas of public health to the commercial determinants of health. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. If you disagree with Mark or anybody, please put it in the Slido, and then Nicole afterwards. I'm not saying we should disagree with you. But maybe, Simon, do we have the public health skills in the room to do nudging? Simon Bacon is an ideal person to have here today, professor at the Department of Exercise in Concordia University in Montreal. And also, I saw your CV. You are in artificial intelligence and digital health. Maybe that's a solution. I'm ready to change all my questions to you, although you have slides already. Yesterday, I learned a lot from Simon, because I had this idea that behavior was all about nudging. But of course, he taught me in a private lecture to Nicole and I, actually, this behavioral sciences is what you need to intervene with regulation, with taxation, with marketing, and so on, from the public health side. And you have this magic wheel that is difficult to understand at the beginning, but please pay attention. It's late. It's really, really good. Could you tell us how you do that?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Bienvenue, tout le monde. So, thank you. I am the interloper, so historically a behavioral scientist, and I spent most of my career focusing on developing interventions very much at the front of behavior change. And actually, over the last 5 to 7 years, our group's really been focusing on behavior change at the public health level. And I would imagine if I asked most of you here if you are behavioral scientists, you'd probably say no. If I asked you if you were public health researcher, scientist, practitioner, you'd say yes. And I would argue there's no differentiation between the two. So what I'm going to do is give you some little tidbits, some insights into why that's the case. So fundamentally, the first thing you have to understand about when you want to go about finding solutions, you have to understand the problem. And what we have here is the behavior change wheel. So this is Susan Mickey's work, who many of you hopefully know. And at the core of it's the COM-B. So capability, opportunity, motivation. All these three things are required to be able to change a behavior. And when you think about that, and you understand what the behavior is you're trying to change, and those three things that are playing upon it, and within any individual population, what the key elements are, then you can start mapping out what solutions might be. And within the behavior change wheel, you have intervention functions, and then beyond that, policy categories. And what I've done on the right-hand side is just give you some brief examples of how that might play out in a food context. Okay, so problem, lack of appropriate portion control for children in the home. Okay, so how do we go about solutions? Well, what's the problem? So it may be capabilities, so a lack of parental knowledge on portion size. The function there would be an education function, so providing information. And how might you do that on a policy perspective? Communication and marketing through a mass media campaign. That's our go-to for a lot of things. But maybe that's not the only part of the problem, okay? Maybe there's also this element around motivation, lack of parental confidence to judge portions. So if that's the case, then enablement is the function. So provision of models of food portion sizes. And how's that delivered policy-wise? Service provision. The point here is not that that's necessarily the right solutions, but understanding the problem allows you to start mapping out what the solutions might be. And then, of course, you can look at another problem, and that would require a different set of solutions. Okay? But you can use the behavior change wheel to start mapping those things out. Okay, so that's one part of it. So once you've understood the problem, okay, how do you actually make the change happen? And this is more work by Susan Mickey. This is the behavior change taxonomy. What Susan did was fantastic. She took all the literature at the point in time, broke it all down, and said, well, what is actually driving behavior change? Okay, and what it is 93 techniques. That's pretty much what we understand is that anything you want to change behavior, you've got to use one of these or a combination of these. Interestingly, nudging is just a small subset of those. So about 10 to 15 of them. So nudges are just a very minimal set of behavior change techniques.
Why is it so attractive? Let me interrupt you.
Well,
why is it so attractive? Why, as I said, years ago, the Observatory was working in several governments doing this report on nudging, and they love the idea. Why is that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so what I've done here is just highlighted a few of the areas where, if you look in orange at some of the nudging things, they seem so attractive because they're so simple, right? And so here, this is how industry uses nudging, right? Prompts and cues, place high sugar cereals or high sugar foods at eye level in a supermarket. That's a classic nudging strategy. Toys included in children's meals, it's another nudging strategy, which is just a behavior change technique, right? The problem fundamentally with nudging is that it's short-term instantaneous behavior that they're targeting. And I'm pretty...
It's not the problem for them, though. It works for them.
Absolutely. So for industry...
It's a problem for us, though.
Correct, right? So for industry, it's beautiful because in that moment, you want people to pick your product. You want them to purchase what they're selling. For us, what we want to do is have sustained long-term behavior change. And these techniques do not lead to that. They're more classical things, goal setting, self-monitoring, action planning. These are all other behavior change techniques. These are the things that actually on an individual level change. And then in terms of how you map that onto policy levels, building those things into the policy pathway become critically important. So key thing there really is...
So shall we forget nudging altogether in public health?
So everything has its place, but it depends what the problem is, right? So a nudge will not necessarily solve all the problems, depending on the nature of the problem. If it's an instantaneous motivation problem or an instantaneous capability problem, a nudge may be a good place to start. It won't be the only thing you need to do. So thinking about, understand the problem, map out the solutions, and then plug in the techniques that you need to be optimally effective is the best way to be able to have population-level behavior change and lead to success.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, colleagues, to the audience, to our colleagues here, and to you that we give you such little time, but time is what it is. Nicole, you go to the hard side, to the hard tools now, the ones we want to hear about. All this nudging, all this behavior, just regulation, regulation, regulation. Look at what the audience said.
I just had another look, and whilst 1 in 3 people here thinks nudging is a good idea, so not that many, 60% think that national regulation is the way to go. So it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Amandine Garde. She's a professor of law at the University of Liverpool, and she's also the president of the EUPHA section on law and public health. From your perspective as a legal expert in national regulations and in the field of public health, what in your view can they achieve? Are they effective, or do we need to think multilateral?
I have two things I've noticed. First, not only the fact that regulation is widely supported by this audience, and we know that regulation can help drive change and durable change whilst creating the level playing field. I'll talk about that in a moment. But also, I note that this audience understands that national regulation may not be enough when you have an internal market where goods, including food and services, including digital services, move from one member state to the other, and therefore we need EU intervention. I have scripted my presentation. I do not have the slides because I was given 5.5 minutes to make my points, and I really want to make the most of these 5.5 minutes. And also, I will add, I wanted to weigh every single one of my words. So I'm going to focus on the European Commission as the institution that proposes legislation in the European Union precisely to promote the free movement of goods, the free movement of services, and bearing in mind that it has an obligation to ensure a high level of public health protection in the development and implementation of all these policies. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm going back 20 years ago, because exactly 20 years ago, I had my first opportunity to closely witness how the commercial determinants of health operate. I was a trainee solicitor in a large commercial law firm whose food law group was helping multinational food companies address what they call the obesity risk. The industry was specifically seeking to ensure that the EU regulation on nutrition and health claims made on food would not see the light of day. After 3 years of intense discussions, the food claims regulation was nonetheless adopted, and it remains a milestone of EU nutrition policy. It prohibits the use of misleading food claims by requiring that nutrition and health claims are subject to a scientific approval process. And I was thrilled at the time to discover a whole new policy area, and at the time, there were reasons to be hopeful. The General Food Safety Regulation establishing the European Food Safety Authority had just been adopted too. The EU was preparing its white paper on nutrition and health. It was starting to reflect on the provision of food information and the regulation of food marketing to children. Fast forward to 2023, and progress has completely stalled. We may still have a lot of commitments from the Commission, but either they are not met, or they rely on public partnerships and the exchange of best practice, rather than the adoption of legally binding measures which create a level playing field within which food business actors have to operate. Regrettably, 3 flagship measures that the Commission had promised in its 2020 Farm to Fork strategy and its 2021 Europe's Beating Cancer plan to improve food environments seem to have disappeared from its agenda, or at least it's been postponed. The adoption of nutrient profiles, the adoption of front-of-pack nutrition labeling schemes, and the adoption of a framework regulation on sustainable food systems. not to mention the EU's resounding failure over this 20-year period to effectively regulate cross-border food marketing to protect children from its harmful effects. We therefore note a growing gap between the EU health rhetoric and the action it seems able to take to promote better health for all. The giants of the food industry are more successful than ever at preventing any EU-wide regulation that could genuinely promote healthier food environments. This state of affairs is all the more staggering as we know far more today than we did 20 years ago about the commercial determinants of health, the lobbying strategies that they use, and the impact that they have on our health. So what should the Commission do to try and reduce the gap between rhetoric and practice? I will briefly list 5 related points in the 2.5 minutes that I have left. Firstly, the Commission must respect the rule of law and human rights. The treaty mandates the EU to ensure a high level of health protection in the development and implementation of all its policies. Secondly, a health in all policies approach, or a One Health approach, requires that the Commission build a stronger consensus between its different directorates general and speak with one voice. When health considerations are at stake, the voice of the Directorate General on Health and Food Safety should not only be heard, but also respected, rather than undermined by potentially more powerful sections of the Commission. Thirdly, the process should be guided by evidence, notwithstanding that industry has the loudest voice and the deepest pockets. For example, it is unacceptable, following a meeting it had behind closed doors with Italian permanent representation and the food industry, the Figueras diplomacy, if you will, that the Commission's Directorate General on Agriculture felt that it was remotely appropriate to dismiss a significant body of peer-reviewed, rigorous, independent research that had accumulated over a long period of time. Giving way to populism never leads to social progress. Fourthly, the Commission should ensure that it adopts robust mechanisms to avoid conflicts of interest. Shouldn't transparency, trust, and accountability be at the heart of everything the EU does? Finally, and very importantly, the Commission should be accountable for the millions of euros of taxpayers' money it has invested to gather evidence. It should use independent scientific research to drive policies forward, not to play in the hands of a few powerful corporate lobbies that only have their profit-making private interest at heart and do not act in the public interest. In conclusion, the Commission must do all it can to address rather than foster power imbalances. It is a prerequisite if it is to protect better health for all through the effective regulation of the commercial determinants of health. For my part, I do hope that there is cause for celebration, or at least some celebration, throughout the 20 years to come. Thank you.
Amandine, you are becoming a pop star today. You are becoming. That's the only
Wembley moments academic have, so I wanted to seize it. Thank
you. Yes, definitely. And proves why public health is not about public health docs, but it's about all professions, and the lawyers are particularly important, using the time in relative ways, but time is relative, and you are the regulator. I have to disagree with you, however. Sorry, Nicole, it was your role, but let me do it. You don't mind.
Go ahead.
What is the Commission? The Commission is you. It's the member states. If I had the Commission here, it's a shame we don't have them. I'm most sort of tempted to ask them to join. And if there was nobody around, they would say, yes, yes, yes. Who's blocking us? Member states manipulated by the food industry. The Commission wants us, no, the Commission hasn't said that. I could imagine the Commission would want us in this room here to go to member states, NGOs, scientists, not in the UK because you're not part of it, Mark, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but there you are, but you will self-regulate. I know you'll self-regulate very well there.
Irish.
So, and what they want, seriously, is we go to Parliament, European Parliament, we go to member states, and we put that there because who's blocking this legislation? That's what we need to ask ourselves. I'm not saying the Commission is great or WHO is great. Actually, WHO and the Commission are great because in a minute we have Gauden. Gauden, you have a real good debate coming for you on what international organizations can do. I'm changing my questions to you, so be ready. So please, let's consider that. I agree with you entirely. I just was provoking you. But just we need to think about what is the Commission, but what we make out of the Commission, and we allow them to do. And they're not allowed.
Respond, or that's the final say?
No, I like to have the final word, like the lawyers. Just respond very quickly.
That's part of a problem. I think I've given some examples where the attitude of the Commission was wholly unacceptable, and it's very difficult to disagree.
Was it the Commission?
Yeah, it was the Commission in this case. Yeah, it's documented, and Foodwatch made a freedom of information request. But on your point, that's very often the case. You talk to the Commission, oh, there's a lack of political will, and we're only the member states. Take the example of front-of-pack nutrition labeling. There's enormous support from a lot of member states who would like to mandate at national level, front-of-pack nutrition labeling schemes, and they are not able to do that because EU legislation does not allow them to do that. A lot of member states would like to regulate food marketing, but they're constrained by some EU legislation that do not allow them to do as much as they want. So I think...
So we need to put pressure on the Commission through member states, the member states, to make sure that happens. Actually, a few days ago, I was in a country whose name I've forgotten, talking to the head of the food agency, and she was saying exactly that she couldn't pass that to national legislation. It was blocked, and she was hoping that the EU would give a hand on that one. So it's a very good example. Thank you very much. I would love to have this debate further. And they still love you. So there you are. I tried to change that. I couldn't. They still love you. Well done, seriously. Well done, Amandine. Caroline Cerny, she got your role. You are the NGO here. You're the director of the Policy and Engagement Director of Bite Back. And talking to you as well, I was very optimistic, thinking that, because I got very optimistic with you, Amandine, as well, thinking about that. You're saying that the youth begin to understand and not to allow to be manipulated by the industry, and they counteract with social media, with sorts of mechanisms. So the question to you is, if we are all desperate and regulation doesn't work, and nothing else works, NGOs, youth, civil society, can that make a difference, and how? Give us a sense, please.
Okay. Well, I'm a bit worried to be following Amandine. Don't quite have the star quality. But I wanted just to take a couple of minutes to tell you about Bite Back 2030. So it was set up in 2019 by the chef Jamie Oliver, who, if you don't know him, he's a chef, but he's done lots of social campaigning as well in the UK, particularly on improving school food, campaigning for the sugary drinks tax, and more recently on free school meals and junk food marketing. And he, along with a few others, took the view that in the policy debate in the UK around food and nutrition, it was dominated by health organisations, by medical organisations, and the voice missing was young people. They're the ones that are really at the sharp end of a broken food system, and yet their voices are never heard in policy debates and by politicians. So Bite Back was set up to change that. And at our core, we have a group of 100 amazing young people who we train up to share their lived experience, to talk to policymakers. And I've been working in food policy now for about 8 or 9 years, and it's very easy for MPs and politicians to ignore me when I tell them about the problems. But when you put a young person, a teenager, in front of an MP, something magic happens, or as they would say, the vibe changes. They can speak truth to power like we can't. And it really has been an effective way to start to help politicians understand the problem and see it from a different angle. So in terms of the work that we do, and I think that I was originally asked to talk about kind of positive examples of working with industry, which I'm probably going to give a bit more of a nuance to you. So I guess the first thing to say is at Bite Back, we absolutely believe, like most of this room, that regulation is the only thing that is going to change the food system. Food businesses will not do this on their own, no matter what they tell politicians. So one thing we do very effectively, as we discussed, is naming and shaming. Brands don't like being called out by young people on social media. So on the right-hand side, we've got an example from Kellogg's. So last year, Kellogg's brought a judicial review against the UK government, trying to overturn a ruling around unhealthy food promotions. They did this on the basis of arguing that the nutrient profile model should only be applied or should take into consideration that when you add milk to cereal, it changes the nutrient profile. Our young people told us that hashtag just add milk was like a hashtag on TikTok than Instagram that has lots of kind of like engagement behind it. Obviously, just add milk worked really well for our purposes, so we created lots of content to basically say, well, if we add milk to crisps, does it make it healthy? If we add milk to burgers, does it make it healthy? And we were able to kind of use that youth insight to kind of call out Kellogg's. The next example is Alice, one of our brilliant young campaigners who we took to Labour Party conference a few weeks ago. And Wes Streeting, who is the shadow health secretary, who it looks quite likely will be the next health secretary in the UK, keeps perpetuating this narrative around, I want to work with industry, to improve the food system. So Alice, we took her to a roundtable event. She asked this question to where she said, when I finished my GCSEs, the first text I got was from Domino's Pizza congratulating me on finishing my GCSEs. I walked out of school and there was a big bus advert with Domino's Pizza. What are you going to do about that? That's been our most engaged bit of content on TikTok, which is amazing for me, from a policy perspective. I'm saying to all my colleagues, look, policy content really works. It's great. Domino's, I've got an inbox full of emails from Domino's, really upset about the fact that we called them out at a party conference and that it's done so well, so they don't like it. But I suppose there's a kind of a flip side to this as well. And last year, we took the view that the government in the UK wasn't going to do anything on regulation. Everything we were trying to do had really stalled. And at the same time, we had some food companies who were saying, well, actually, we do want to do more. What can we do? So we decided to see whether taking our young people to speak truth to power to food businesses could have the same effect. Could we mobilise change? So we set up a structured programme with certain food companies who told us that they wanted to do things better and they wanted to change. Took young people in to meet them, to meet their CEOs, to meet their executive boards, and then work with them to see if they could commit to an evidence-based goal. We'll be publishing evaluation next year, early next year. It's been, as you can imagine, not all great news. A couple of businesses did nothing. One we had to even kick off the programme because they were so bad. A couple have trialled some quite interesting behavioural insights techniques, actually. So one of the food delivery platforms worked with a fast food brand to actually test different nudge techniques on an app to see whether it worked. Had some quite interesting results. But I think where we've seen the most interesting side of things is where we've been able to, or where businesses are telling us that having the pressure, having the young people coming in and talking to their boards is helping keep health on the agenda at a time when it wouldn't otherwise because the government isn't putting any pressure on businesses.
How do we recruit these people in public health? How do we get them on board? Do you think that in public health, whatever public health is, because it's everything actually, but the main profession, we don't have those skills, do we?
I think we do.
Good.
Yeah, I think we do. And I think we need to move
outside. We need more or we got enough then?
Well, I think we need to think that it's not just about public health. Everyone is interested in health. Nobody wants to be unhealthy.
Exactly.
So you don't need to be a public health person to have these conversations. And that's why young people are so great at delivering it, because it's their lived experience. That's all they do is share their stories. And it's so powerful.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. A very optimistic way to look at it and look at the future. Gauden Galea from Copenhagen. Welcome, Gauden. Gauden is a strategic advisor to regional director on NCDs, very much instrumental in the 2025 meeting, UN meeting next year, in 2 years actually. Gauden was a special representative of WHO during the COVID in China. Very difficult job. You learn a lot of diplomacy there. And a former director of the NCD department. Gauden, and an academic and a scholar in this field as well, Gauden. I'm tempted not to ask you a question, I make you to reflect, actually. I wanted to ask you whether we can have a framework food convention as we have for tobacco. I was tempted to ask you what else can we do at international level, what other regulations can we do? Can we have a treaty as we have now for NCDs, for COVID, can we have it for food as well? What can we do? What can we do? I really want you to focus on the international arena. Does COVID give us now the opportunity to have a go at NCDs and commercial determinants?
Okay, and thank you for changing the questions, Josep.
You know me.
In a way, it's good because the group there, I cannot see anyone, but I could hear, and it's such a wonderful group to be in, and the sequence of points, it's difficult to find a different niche, but let me try. I come from a generation where we grew up where the tobacco industry would act with impunity. They could advertise on newspapers every day. They would sell their goods in attractive packaging, and there were no warnings, not even a text warning when I started in public health. They would claim a section of the cabin in airplanes as the smokers by right, and it would pollute the rest of the plane and affect the rest of the passengers. So it is that generation of public health professionals in the 80s and the 90s that decided enough. We have to act, and we have to call out the tobacco industry. A strong aspect of that work was litigation, the collection of a set of effective regulations, effective interventions such as pricing. I remember the time when the tobacco industry would even say that there was no evidence that price intervention would reduce the consumption of tobacco.
Gauden, can we use all that now for food? I would like us to look forward on that.
Can we use it for food? So the idea is, I am very cautious about this. The tobacco industry made a few mistakes, like the big event in Congress where the main CEOs stood up and swore under oath that tobacco was not harmful for health. The alcohol and the food industries are both wiser and much larger. If we compare the companies, Altria is about half as large as AB InBev, the alcohol company, and Nestlé is again about twice as large as AB InBev. These are much larger and more influential corporations. And for a group of public health practitioners, as we have here, I think a very important technique is to identify specific evidence-based regulations and to push forward. So what do I mean by that? We must not be complacent about the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Many people in public health seem to have understood that tobacco is now a problem of the past, and they're seeking new challenges. In Europe, we have very poor still use of the price intervention, and we're allowing ourselves to be divided by the novel tobacco products that are being put forward by the industry as a means of harm reduction, using that phrase as a way of somehow suggesting that the old techniques don't work. We need to resign ourselves that there's tobacco and nicotine addiction, and we should now be adopting their new products instead of using price and smoke-free public places. The same is happening in the area of alcohol. And so I take you to, if you look at the websites in the last 3 days, WHO, our regional director, Hans Kluge, and Elisabeth Wiederpass, the director of IARC, have issued a joint statement to raise awareness that there is no threshold level of alcohol use below which a cancer risk is undetectable. We are somehow have been hoodwinked by the alcohol industry that there is some form of alcohol that is beneficial because we are bound to use of the phrase, the harmful use of alcohol.
Yeah.
That we have argued in this joint statement against a move that we are seeing in Europe and in the European Parliament. There is currently an own initiative report being discussed and voted upon, where the previous language on the harm attributable to alcohol has become watered down into moderate and responsible drinking information or the harmful consumption of alcohol. As far as cancer is concerned, we cannot be talking about the harmful use of alcohol, but rather about the harms that are caused by alcohol use. We should not be talking about responsible drinking, but about the responsibility of industry and holding it to account for the cancers that it directly causes. Litigation was an important exercise in the area of tobacco. Maybe we should start using it in the area of cancer on the alcohol industry. And maybe one last point that I would like to, I'm not sure how much of my 5 minutes I've taken up, but continue to advocate for specific evidence-based regulation. One of the
let me introduce Gauden and we will wrap up.
Yes.
There is plenty of evidence based, for instance, on labeling, for instance, on the health harm of alcohol, or putting the amount of sugar, because some people that drink don't like to get obese. And yet it's been blocked. The same person I was mentioning earlier, whose name I've forgotten as well, was saying that that was blocked at national level. So the evidence of that regulation is there, but don't we need evidence on the implementation of regulation? Don't we need evidence on the lobbying, on the presenting, no? Tell me.
No, I completely agree with Mark on this. We have enough evidence. We have enough evidence on the harms of sugar. We have enough evidence on the harms of alcohol. We have enough evidence on the harms of tobacco, different sorts, in different doses and in different mechanisms, but we have enough evidence to act. And as we do in the environmental field, we need to start using more actively the precautionary principle in the area of non-communicable disease. We need to bring in regulation even when we need to start experimenting with different types of regulations and standards, even if, and we will never have, as Mark said, perfect evidence.
That's absolutely perfect, but there's enough evidence for action. Gauden, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Copenhagen in such a lively way. And Nicole, I'm always responsible for being late, so now you summarize everything. Tell us what our colleagues are saying, the audience is saying. And as always, I'll give you 30 seconds and then to conclude, because I'm not sure what I want to conclude. So 30 seconds each to conclude a bit what you heard today. Maybe you want to vote and take your favorite vote. You can do whatever you like. But Nicole, first, what the audience...
Or comment on the audience feedback. So a couple of points. One person was pointing out that the language of commercial determinants of health might be favoring industry, and maybe we should talk about commercial causes of disease.
Like that.
Someone else was wondering whether organized communities actually can compete with organized money, given the current power imbalances and the structures within which we operate. So is the problem fundamental about the system, or can we actually change something within it? And do we need, since we have enough evidence, do we need to develop guidance on what is good evidence or good enough evidence, so that we can start from there to use this evidence? And lastly, and this one is maybe a bit controversial, would monetary incentives for industry to align their goals with public health goals work as an option?
Perfect. We will not attempt to respond those, but maybe you want to include certain reflection in your 30 seconds for all that. Can I start at this side then? Would you like to?
I'll take on incentives, actually. I mean, I would argue that a lot of regulation is a good incentive, and it's about reframing what an incentive is. The food system at the moment is incentivized to produce kind of ultra-processed, unhealthy food in bulk, and we can't get rid of the food industry, so we need to incentivize them to do better, and I think fiscal measures are the best way to do that, and they need to be regulatory.
Thank you. Amandine.
I would say again that the lack of political will is often used as a cloak for inaction. And it's too simple to say, oh, there's not enough political will. And your question or your comment made me think. And actually, the Commission is meant to act in the EU's interest, the collective interest of member states, independently of each and every one of the member states. So it should propose legislation, and then member states get to discuss the text, and this is in Council of Ministers, that states' interests become individually represented, and that's really what the community we should like to see.
Well done. I think we need a political scientist as well, you know, because it's not always happening the way it should happen, but I agree with you, of course. Simon.
Thank you very much. I've got a few points I'm just going to finish up with. So the first, the comparison with tobacco is really interesting. So number one, what's positive about the comparison is tobacco used multiple different levers, right? So just regulation wasn't the only thing. There's marketing, et cetera, The problem with the comparison with tobacco is no one needs to smoke. Everyone needs to eat, so we have to be very careful that we don't just transplant the same exact interventions into diet. We may need some nuance around that. The other thing, just want to say, is that politicians and people in industry, contrary to popular belief, are human beings, and they are driven by behavior change processes in exactly the same way. So we really need to think about how we target them and get them to change their behaviors. One thing I will highlight is evidence is knowledge, and knowledge is just one small facet of capability. So if the only thing that we can bring to the table is knowledge, we will not be successful. We need to treat it as a system. And the final thing, implementation is fantastic. It's also behavior change too. So if you want to change the system, change the process, it's behavior change. Thank you.
And motivation to get the politicians to act as well, show that they can get lots of votes. Absolutely. By, okay. Mark, have you changed your mind after all what you heard?
I think I've actually strengthened my position because I actually feel I've heard quite enough. We started talking about structural political change, and we ended up, as we always do, talking about motivation, psychological implications, behavior. Industry loves this stuff. And what really concerns me in the commercial determinants of health is that if we do what has happened in the social determinants of health, what Margaret Whitehead has called lifestyle drift, we start thinking upstream, and then we end up talking about giving people leaflets and telling them they should be more resilient. So I actually think I've strengthened my position, and I think that we actually have to avoid the sorts of discussions we've ended up at. So when I hear the word behavior, I hear individualism, and I think that actually it competes with some of the upstream thinking about effective regulation. So I think I've sort of shifted. You've pushed me down towards somewhere even more intransigent.
Is that good or bad?
I'm not too sure.
Iveta, are you happy because we did that together and you took the leadership? Are you happy what you heard?
Absolutely. I enjoyed very much this discussion. And actually what I like here is also the controversy, that we don't agree with each other, and it is fantastic. So what I like about this panel is that I think it perfectly represents the multidimensionality which we wanted to achieve, different fields, different professions, different ideas. But going back to behavioral science, I'm myself a behavioral scientist, so I have to agree with Simon, and I think we just don't understand it properly because it's not the individual level. You can apply this, as Simon said, to change policies, to change politicians, to change whole societies. It's not the individual approach only. And we must not forget that Hans Kluge, the current director of the WHO Europe, is a big fan of behavioral and cultural insights. It's one of the 4 flagship initiatives, so actually behavioral and cultural insights should be mainstreaming, and we should use behavioral lens to change the behavior of people, because behavior of the people is the main determinant of health, right? So everybody is behaving somehow, and without knowledge of behavioral science, you cannot change the behavior of people. So I think this is a very important point, actually. And yeah, this is one thing which I forgot to say in my presentation, actually, and it goes back a little bit also to behavioral science, is that I think commercial actors are very clever, actually. You know, they are using all kinds of tricks how to fool us. Maybe we should learn something from them, and maybe we should use the same tricks to promote health and prevent diseases. Why not?
Yeah, why not? Nice, famous words.
There's no evidence that it works.
It works.
There's no
they have
evidence.
There's no evidence.
I think we
Mark
need
is saying
another
there's no
panel.
evidence.
So you're contradicting yourself
Shall
because
we
you said
restart
there
the
is enough
cycle of debate
evidence.
again? Well, I will conclude that and then followed by Nicole.
We're not finished, Josep.
Order in the room, please, please. Well, thank you. Apologies for stealing almost 12 minutes of your time, additional time, but the reception is ready. Just next apology is, I've been rude, I know, but we had agreed on a bit of role-playing, so I hope you don't mind, as a way to create a bit some controversy, but actually it's a real controversy. It wasn't role-playing, actually, but we agreed we could be rude with each other. For those of you who want to tell the Commission and the EU that they should do more on those commercial determinants, Amandine, we have a session, a plenary, Saturday. The Observatory is running some debates for and with Santé, trying to collect what are the priorities, your priorities that should be in the next Commission. We are not consulting, we're debating, we're hearing it, that we'll do a report for them. We'll open as well the website. And please join us Saturday, because we'll have a really good involvement of all of you, also voting about what should be those priorities. And certainly, usually, the health in all policies, the determinants becomes very, very powerful there. And I'll leave the last and most important announcement to you, Nicole, and anything else you want to add.
I'll add a bit more of self-promotion to that. We have, the Observatory is 25 years old, and we have an event tomorrow at 12:50, so around lunchtime, at our book stand, and we would be really, really happy if you came to join us and celebrate this milestone.
We took advantage of the platform, sorry. And thank you to all of you for being here.
And
thank
enjoy
you very
your
much.
evenings.